Hi guys, I'm the Drink Pro. Today we're drinking a Midwinter Night's Dram, Act 7, Scene 5. What's up everybody, the Drink Pro here. Thanks so much for joining me. Thank you for your continued support, liking and subscribing the videos, joining the Patreon. I'm so blessed to be here with you guys, and I love to keep working on it. I've got some really cool stuff in the future that's coming up. I'm hoping to start some new shows that will be within this channel that you'll really enjoy. So today, I'm tasting a Midwinter Night's Dram. Now this has been around for a while. They've done various different projects with this whiskey. They actually number the acts and the scenes like it's a book. It's kind of a play on A Midwinter Night's Dream, A Midwinter Night's Dram. A dram, for those who don't know, is actually 1/8 of an ounce of whiskey. People will often talk about drams when they're referring to full pours, but a dram is actually a proper measurement in the English system. So it's worth keeping in mind if somebody says, hey, you want a dram of whiskey? They probably mean a full pour, but you never know. Now, A Midwinter Night's Dram is bottled by the High West Distillery in Park City, Utah. This particular batch is the Act 7, Scene 5 of what they call a limited engagement. Essentially what that means is that they're doing different blends each time and different processes to create the Midwinter Night's Dram editions. It's much like a batch whiskey, like your Stag Juniors or the like. This particular blend is recently purchased. It's a relatively new blend from 2019, and I paid too much for it. I paid $130 for this bottle, which is too much. If you're paying over $100, you should probably reconsider it, unless you just really love rye whiskey. And we'll get into that a little bit more with the palate, but it's a good whiskey regardless, which I will explore some more. I will say I love the glass on this whiskey. I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's little bubbles throughout it. High West bottles are really great. They've got their logo on it and everything, and the wood top on the cork. Oh, it's quiet though. It's still quiet. It's a quiet cork, but it's very nice. It feels good in your hand. A Midwinter Night's Dram is a blend of rye whiskeys, and then they finish it in French oak port barrels. So you're going to get a little bit of a wine finish on this, which is not something I've talked a lot about in the review process. A lot of different whiskeys, especially in recent times, are exploring with finishes because the rules behind bourbon and rye in the United States are fairly restrictive, and there are a few ways you can really explore and expand the palate. One of the easiest ones is to take a bourbon product, for example, or a rye product in this case, and finish it in the barrel of something else. I've seen Curacao barrels, cognac barrels, Armagnac barrels, every kind of wine you can think of. I've seen rum barrels, tequila barrels. They're really going and exploring the space in regards to what kind of other liquor or spirit barrel you can put whiskey in. There's also kind of the flip side of this industry where there are now wines and cognacs that are being aged in bourbon barrels. There's a lot of different beers that are being aged in bourbon barrels as well. And especially prominent beer that's being aged in whiskey barrels is the Bourbon County Stout, which has different releases each year that are limited runs, and each type of beer is aged in a different distillery's barrel. And that information is disclosed so you can really see how whiskey flavors affect beer. Now that I think about it though, I haven't seen many bourbons that are finished in beer barrels. Maybe I just haven't been looking for them, but that's not something I've seen a lot of. It's worth exploring. But for now, the French oak port barrel behind the rye whiskeys. So it's going to be an interesting taste, guys. If you know you like sweet wine, something that's finished in a port barrel or a cognac barrel is really going to speak to you. Now, just by looking at the color of this, you can kind of tell that this has been in a wine barrel. The color is almost the color of wine. And on the nose, it smells like wine. You really get that port prominent note. That grape distillate really shines through. And it's kind of hard to describe wine notes on the nose. It's easier to describe wine when you're smelling wine, but when you're smelling wine vis-a-vis smelling the wine finish on a rye, it's kind of hard to break down the different components of the port, in this case, itself. I definitely know that there's a port finish, but trying to get into the nuances of it is rather difficult. I guess I'm getting some raisins, maybe some plums. It's definitely that sweet, sugary note, the sweet, dark fruit note, berries. And the underlying rye spice is there too, just in hints. There may even be a little sourness here. It can be tricky when you're using barrels that have had other distillate in them, particularly if it's wine, because wine goes bad after a little while. So if you're using wine barrels, you better get them quick, or else the wine that's still in the barrel could spoil. And if you don't get them quick, there are techniques you can use to restore the flavors in the barrel or to pull out the spoiled notes. But there's something fun about getting a barrel that's fresh. I just was recently listening to a discussion of how a local distillery from Bardstown uses argon gas to preserve the wine barrels they were using. And those wine barrels then stay in the current state they're in, so when they're transported on a refrigerated truck and they get to the distillery, they haven't been spoiled at all. As soon as they're dumped, they're filled with the gas, they're transported, and it still smells and tastes like fresh wine. Now, I almost forgot to mention, and I kind of like this note, the proof on this is 49.3% alcohol, which is 98.6 proof. I don't know why this is kind of a common thread. Blood Oath makes a lot of sense to me because Blood Oath, the temperature of blood in Fahrenheit is 98.6 degrees, so Blood Oath 98.6 proof. I get that. I'm not sure why a Midwinter Night's Dram is doing that same thing. Maybe there's some detail in Shakespeare that I'm missing. I've read Shakespeare, but I didn't really keep it with me in my mind. The wine really is predominant on the nose here, though. Maybe there's some almond notes, some subtle rye spices, but you're really getting that the grape and the dark fruit sweetness from the wine. So let's give this a taste. It's so incredibly smooth. For something that's 100, blended rye, finished in wine barrels, I'm expecting a lot more of a challenge and a lot more fight when I'm drinking this. But it's really, it all fits together so well. It's a real testament to the blending and distilling that's being done by High West to make sure that this product all fits together. Because you're mixing a lot of different flavors with different rye whiskeys and with a port barrel. A lot of that could end up with a clash and a really difficult to drink whiskey, but it's so smooth. Smooth, by the way, is not a negative comment about the flavor of whiskey. There's been a real controversy on certain groups on Facebook, and elsewhere for that matter, about using smooth as an adjective to describe whiskey. I don't at all subscribe to the claim that if you use smooth, you mean you don't know what's going on in the whiskey. Smooth is a texture note. Now, it's not a flavor note. I agree with people there. If somebody says a whiskey is smooth, that's great, but try to pull out some specific flavor. It's smooth. That's really valuable. Now, do you get a sweetness? Do you get a bitterness? Do you just get alcohol burn? That kind of note is valuable to expand past the smoothness. But that doesn't mean smoothness isn't important. Some of these whiskeys up here are not smooth. Not at all. This one is, and that's worth knowing. The rye spice is there, but it's very muted, and the sweetness from the rye, it gets you this nice sweet grain, and it's a complement to the port barrel. You can really tell you get that fruity sweetness mixed with the grain sweetness. Then you get a soft rye spice on the palate. It continues on. It kind of lingers for a long time. The mid palate on this is really long, and the finish is really gentle. It's maybe like grape skins. I don't get a lot of woodiness, really. There's a soft, subtle bitterness to the finish on this whiskey. You can really hunt out the rye spice and the wood spices, but they're not prominent. What's really prominent is the sweetness from the port and the sweetness from the rye kind of coalescing and becoming this wonderful honeyberry sweetness. The rye spice sticks out in the mid-palate. I could even see somebody saying there was a cherry note in this, but it's pretty subtle. If you keep tasting it over time, the wood starts to show up a little bit more, especially on the finish. You get a little bit of the pepper tingle. There's a real sourness on the nose when I go back to it after tasting it. Like sour grapes, and I really like it. I didn't expect to like it, but I do. I really like it. The more I drink this, the more the rye comes out, the more the woody notes come out. The sweetness and the softness of the port kind of takes a back seat as you continue to drink it and becomes more and more rye focused. This is good stuff, guys. It's a very worthwhile whiskey to buy if you can find it under $100 or for about that. I'd really recommend it. It does a lot of interesting things on the palate. I really like the coalescing of the rye and the port barrel flavors, but it's not as complex as maybe other whiskeys at $100. but it's a really interesting presentation of these classic rye and classic port flavors. So sometimes when you're paying $100, you're paying for a really wonderful journey, and sometimes you're paying for sort of a perfect form of a whiskey, the ideal presentation of a style. And I really feel like this is kind of falling into that second category. But I think that's a really good thing. Each individual sip of this whiskey is not a journey, but the entirety of the glass is a journey. When you start, you're drinking a port, and when you finish, you're drinking a rye. And in between, there's this beautiful meshing, and it tells a story. And maybe that's why it's called a Midwinter Night's Dram. They know that they're trying to tell a story with this whiskey, and so they ripped off a Shakespeare name to do it. I can't blame them. If you're going to steal from somebody, steal from Shakespeare. I'm going to keep drinking and enjoying my own story here, and you all should keep drinking like professionals. Cheers.